Welcome to the Tent Talks at the Pottery Expo Warrandyte, hosted by Slow Clay Centre. Welcome everyone to the first Tent Talk for today. My name's Jane Sawyer and I run Slow Clay Centre, which is based in Collingwood, and our stall is on the other side of this wall if you're interested in finding out more about what we do. We do a lot of talks. We do guest artist workshops, usually, right throughout the year, every month or two. So we've got some wonderful artists that we've built up friendships with over the years, and we've got two such artists here this morning, Sandy Lockwood and Sue Hannah. The topic for the talk today is just wood firing and women who wood fire, because these two are the queens of wood firing, or I should say two of the queens. There can only be one queen, but we've got many queens of wood firing, and we had a lovely other one yesterday, Jan Kesby. So there are quite a few women who wood fire now, but it's a wonderful thing to be doing. It's a heavy-duty approach to ceramics, and it's anyway, they can talk more about the ins and outs of it all. Before we start, though, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're hosting this event, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Culture is ongoing, and we really respect all the culture that comes our way. So we are starting today, as I said, with Women Who Wood Fire. We've got two other talks to follow during the day. Another one at 11:15, which is the Greening Studio. So we're trying to look at issues of sustainability, how we practice in sustainable ways as much as possible. Then we finish the day at 2 o'clock with our final talk, which is another panel of speakers about the International Academy of Ceramics, of which we had a panel yesterday as well, who spoke about some of the IAC, the International Academy of Ceramics, objectives and some of their activities, and also their particular work. So as artists, what they've done. There is an exhibition here at the Pottery Expo for the first time of members of the IAC, and it's down the main drag and to your left a little bit, about halfway down. So make sure you go and see that exhibition as well. We do these tent talks as a way of educating people about ceramics, because it's a very complex field. And we also do it so that it demystifies some of the things about ceramics, and that you can feel then that you can go to these artists and ask questions, or any of the wonderful artists here at the Expo, and ask questions. Don't feel like a fool. It doesn't matter how silly you sound. It means that we're just opening doors for new knowledge for you. So we have a Q&A session at the end of these talks, and we welcome you to ask any questions. Just stay around a bit longer and ask questions if you prefer. So welcome to you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Sandy and Sue. We're going to start off with Sandy, and I'll just flick through the images when we get to them. But thank you. Could you join me in making them both very welcome? Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Thanks. What?
I didn't introduce you properly.
That's fine. That's good enough.
I was too busy saying other things. Sandy Lockwood, who has a long, illustrious career in ceramics and has been wood firing for very many years, which she'll tell you about, but also a very experienced teacher. And we need to say Dr. Sandy Lockwood, because she actually has a PhD in ceramics now, which is a very rare thing. So over to you, more.
I embarrassed you enough. Yeah, no, now that I'm quite embarrassed. No, thanks, Jane, and lovely to be invited to do this. And I call it the Tent/TED Talks, because actually that's where the name comes from. So yeah, they're a great idea, really. And thanks for Jane Anwar. I'm not sure if she's here, but gosh, what an amazing event. This is the 21st year. You've probably heard that. What an entrepreneur to get that going and keep it going, because it's a huge job. So, yeah, really, thanks for doing it. And it was good to be invited to come. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me or my practice, I'll do a little introduction, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's behind my work, and then I'm going to show some images of my work, so you get a bit of a heads up first. So I live in the Southern Highlands, and for Victorians, that's 2 hours, about 2.5 hours from Sydney, southwest. In a small village called Balmoral, which you actually may have heard of because of last year's bushfires. So that Balmoral village is my home, and I've been there for over 40 years, and I just bought a tin shed on a block of land, and then proceeded to build a wood kiln because that was the most important thing, and then from there all the other things like a house and a studio and a whatever orchard and vegetable garden. So I've been living and working there and making my life centred around pots for a long period there. So my introduction to wood firing came as a student. So when I was at what was then East Sydney Technical College, we were able to wood fire. That's since not able to happen in the city, but it was, when I first did the first wood firing, it was magic, and I just felt, that's it, I've got to do this thing. And also I was allowed to put salt in the kiln, and again, that's not probably going to be possible. So younger artists today don't get that much opportunity, but can talk about that later if anybody wants to know more. So this, if you turn next, thanks. So look, what attracted me, I'm trying to work out the perspective on all that. The firing and the kiln play a central role in the making, so they're so intimately connected and not separate activities. So the making feeds the firing, and then the firing results feed the making. So I can't, to isolate them is not easy to try to do. So it's an integrated process. And the main thing is it's not all under my control, which can be terribly difficult at times because there's a lot of losses. But it means that I'm forever excited about what I'm doing and what I'm going to get out of a kiln. So I've not got a predictable result. That's probably the most crucial part of my choice to do firing this way. So I make appropriate clays, particular forms because of the kiln, place them in particular areas of the kiln, and fire them with absolutely full attention on the firing as to what's going on in the kiln. So I can't walk away during a firing, which is tiring, but it's a necessary part. So possibility of unknown always present, and the fact that it's out of my control is significant. Okay, so if you put a kiln shot, oh yes, that's me stoking a kiln. Okay, so I've got 3 wood-burning kilns. 2 of them are designated salt kilns, which means I'm putting salt into the kiln during the firing.
You might need to explain that.
Yes, okay, yeah. So what I do, salt is just sodium chloride, and if you know any sort of chemistry, it's a flux basically. So sodium, throwing salt into the kiln, that's actually what I'm doing there, means that salt becomes a vapour and travels through the kiln and attaches itself to the entire insides of the kiln, including the pots and the shelves and whatever else. So, you have to really be working with that. And then it forms a sodium silicate glaze. So most of the work goes in either raw, a bare clay, or slipped clay, but not glazed. And then the glaze result is happening from the firing and the introduction of the salt. So that goes in at high temperature, 1300 degrees centigrade, it's stoneware temperatures. And the salt that I use is just the ordinary swimming pool salt, although we don't have a swimming pool. It's kind of easy and cheap to buy. And so that's the process. How much salt, when, all of that, there's lots of variations, and I'm forever experimenting on that part of it. Okay, so then I have two wood-fired salt kilns and one wood kiln that I don't put salt in, and I use that for teaching. So I've been running introduction to wood firing workshops at home, which have become very popular because people don't are interested, but they don't know what it's like, whether they would like to do it, and there isn't very many places where you can just go and be involved in a wood firing. So that's been something that I've been offering for a while. Okay, so if you turn that. Okay, so what you're looking at here is an image looking through a spy hole. So in an ordinary kiln, you'll have a little round hole in an electric kiln or a gas kiln, but in a wood kiln, it's a brick hole, and I pull the brick out, and I can look in, and I can see what's going on. So I've got pyrometric cones, which are the standing up things that are bending, and they tell me what temperature it is in the kiln. So I need to look at that regularly. And behind that is a tea bowl, and then you can also see the evidence of ash and glaze because there's a big drip there. So drips are common. Okay, so I've explained about salt glaze already, so we'll skip that bit. Okay, and losing pieces. Okay, it's very common to lose pieces, and I've learnt to live with that. I mean, at first it was devastating. In my early days, I'd lose a whole kiln load. And think, forget this is just dreadful. But what happens is there's some things that are produced in the kiln that I didn't imagine, that I didn't plan, that wasn't in my control. That's the draw card. It's a random reinforcement idea. Okay, so a few years ago, I thought I would ask myself the question, why do I do this? Why do I do such a difficult, demanding process? I mean, you have to split wood, you have to stay up, you have to, it's a lot of stuff, and you're losing work. So what is it in the results that speaks so strongly to me? So I was trying to unpack that in my mind, and I actually decided to take on a PhD in order to ask that question, which is another big thing to take on, which I don't necessarily recommend to answer questions. But I did want to understand my thoughts, emotions, and engagement with this thing that I did. Okay, so what was it? It was an attraction to something I ended up through the process of kind of labouring on lots of reading and lots of questioning and lots of looking up of dictionaries of words, that what was the core part of it was what I came up with, this idea of visual complexity. So the surface of those forms are not simple. They have multiple things going on the surface. And I think all wood fires would say that, and maybe in other firings too. So a surface that changed as you moved around the pot. So it's this side's different to that side. Sometimes it's got matte areas and not matte areas. Sometimes it's very fluid, particularly with Sue's work. Her fluidity is just amazing with the ash, the way she's loading her kiln. The ash is making an incredibly fluid surface. And then there are strong colours and then there are subtle colours. So you get both. You don't have to choose one or the other. And the texture of the clay is variable. And the marks from your making are highlighted by the process. So they don't disappear. Your hand marks show in the work and where it was placed in the kiln. So that all contributes to this thing what I'm calling visual complexity. So in my research, I went back a little bit to find out what else had that kind of visually complex surface. And I had a great interest always in everything that was old, much more than everything that was new. So an old building, an old stone wall, and I decided that it was a sort of weathering look. Weathered things were much more engaging for me than other things. So weathering in nature is a bit of a driver for that kind of visual complexity in the environment. And wood firing is also that. So wood firing, so the PhD was largely about making that analogy between wood firing and natural weathering in producing this result. But wood firing has speeded up weathering, so you can put something in the kiln and 2 days later it's done, hundreds of years of stuff. When you get it out, it no longer looks crisp and clean. So it's a particularly intriguing kind of look and unpredictable, lacking uniformity and unpredictability, and it really engages me. And lots of nuance, lots of, oh, what's happened there, or why is that? Or so the questioning is ongoing and constant. And you can't take the work that you see from wood firing in at a single glance. It's very difficult to just look at a wood-fired piece and then walk away and have got it, which is the case for a lot of work that's very, I don't quite know how to describe it, but there's no change from front to back, no sort of subtleties. There's other things, people are decorating the work and all kinds of wonderful other ceramics, but for me it was this visual change. So you can't take it in quickly, and so when you look at the pot, you need to spend time with it, and you need to the engagement over time tells you more. So you're living with this object that's still talking to you. Okay, so now we'll move to some sculpture. That was a long bit of rambling. So in the PhD, I mostly did sculptural work, and so I'm just going to show you a few of those, and then some works that are kind of a bit of a crossover, and then some tableware, which I've mostly got over there on my stall. So these are abstract sculptures. They came up out of the idea of digging stuff up out of the ground. So they're called the Unearthed series. And they show hopefully they show the visual complexity I'm after and movement. And that's, hopefully that idea is in all the works that I make. Okay, so you can go to the next one. So the clay bodies are very important. I compose all the clays except for porcelain. So by using powdered raw materials, using some local materials, throwing rocks in the clay, just all kinds of experiments, some of which are disastrous and some are pretty good, all right. So, yeah, if you want to move on. This is actually a porcelain I made. And so when you put a pot like this in the firebox, you can get all kinds of extra action because there's a lot of blackness from the ember sitting right in the firebox, and quite a lot of us all wood firers all love that area. Also, you lose a lot of the work in that area. Okay, so moving on. So now this is a more familiar form. It's a flower brick. You can stick your flowers in the holes, but it's still using this idea of an abstract approach, and the textural qualities show movement, and there's ash coloration from being near the firebox. But you can use it, which the others are a little less useful. Okay, another one that's a familiar form. So I started making plates, which can go on a wall, because that's one of the things we like to do is put a plate on a wall. But I wanted to see what the abstract nature of my sculptures could help me with doing that, and hopefully showing the material qualities of clay on that. And the next one, so that's a sushi tray, fairly obviously. That was just put in the kiln, bare clay, and because it was fired in a particular way, it was actually fired upside down on those little marks that are wadding marks, to keep it from sticking to the shelf. It got the flame movement on the pot. So one direction the flame is coming and then leaving the work. Okay, so now we'll move into it. So I've been to Japan a number of times in relation to my practice, and I've also briefly studied Japanese tea ceremony. And so this is actually a tea ceremony water container called a mizusashi for the water that gets used to top up the kettle at the tea ceremony. It doesn't really matter, it's just an interesting pot, but that's actually how I came to these. So there's a lot of the objects I'm making are about reference to tea ceremony. Shows colour, texture, it's porcelain lid, stoneware bottom, and it alludes to the movement of water. Okay, so now so I've just got two tea bowls. They show the different results from using different clays and in different parts of the kiln. So, when I make the tea bowls, they're quite a special item for me. So They get particular clays, sometimes tests of clays, and also particularly good spots in the kiln. And then if they're good, they last, they live, and if they aren't good, they don't. They go in the shard pile. A chowan's generally about 13 centimetre diameter. Yeah, so hard to tell from images. Yeah. And then the next one's another chowan. So yeah, love making these. Okay, so in the next few slides, it's just a few of my tableware. I make lots of teapots. It shows, just keep going. Yeah, teapots, jugs, useful things.
Do you want to explain the salt glaze orange skin?
Yes, okay, so, we're actually not that far from Bendigo, are we? But, okay, all right. Well, all right. It's much closer than I am. I mean, I only mention that because sometimes people have seen the old Bendigo pots. They used to make chimney pots and water pipes and all kinds of things, and you can see them on buildings. And they're mostly brown from the Bendigo pottery, and they've got a little dotty surface, and that is called orange peel because it looks like the peel of an orange. And that's because the salt is reacting with little bits of silica in the clay body. So it doesn't make a clean, uniform glaze. It makes this dotty look. And then, of course, ash hits the pot and lands on it. So you get both, yeah. And then a platter. So, again, just bare clay. There's no glaze, extra glaze applied. And fired upside down on shells. Tea caddies. Make a few of those. And that's the last one. Yeah. So all the different aspects of my work, functional and abstract, are connected for me. Sometimes people say, you've got two practices. No, I haven't. I've got one practice. They need each other. They feed each other. In the kiln, I need both because that way I can put these things there, those things there. So I'm imagining a 3D jigsaw puzzle when I'm making. And they all hopefully show this visual complexity that I'm after. And that's it. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Sandy. That was amazing. It was great to hear about embracing the unknown. Very big thing to learn with ceramics. Probably the number one lesson, really, but it keeps going all our lives, doesn't it? Whilst I'm setting up Sue's talk, if there's anyone who has a few questions to throw at Sandy, please do just shout loudly and Sandy will repeat them back to the audience because it'll take me a couple of minutes just to swap over and then we'll have you swap seats once we get ready. Thanks. Any questions?
Okay. Far away. Yep. Oh, hello. Sorry. I mean, this has been about, meeting old friends, isn't it? Yeah.
I'd like to last comment about this sort of 3D jigsaw puzzle. Do you find that you're making forms and you're visualising how they're going to fit?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. But without wanting that entirely to control it, because I need freedom to make what's coming up next in me. So definitely there's that too. So then I have to say, okay, well, I want to do this piece, so then I'm going to have to make some of these other things because they might work with it.
So do you find that you're fighting that formula with scale and shapes?
Fighting, I'm conscious of it. I'm just conscious of it, yeah. Yeah. And it's really good to have quite a lot of pieces when you're loading so that I can do this juggling act in the packing and leave some out. So, yeah, for another time. So, yeah. Sorry, did you hear that question? I was supposed to repeat it and already I've forgotten to do that. First step.
It was a long question, but it's about the jigsaw puzzle.
The jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and planning.
And whether when you're making, you're being prescriptive of how they're going to fit and whether you need to intentionally break that
Yeah.
form.
Yeah. Yeah. So packing the kilns and economy of space, really. Yeah, a question about that. I have actually managed to get Sue's up on the screen now. So if you swap places, and if there are any other questions, save them up till the end, because we've allowed some time at the end for further questions. So I'd like to introduce Sue Hannah now. Sue's based outside of Bendigo in Victoria, and has been wood firing for a long, long time, since the 90s. Her work is very, very luscious. Sandy just referred to it as being very drippy and fluid, lots of ash deposits. So it's fascinating, even within the genre of wood firing, how many differences there can be. So I challenge you all to go around to the stalls and look closely at everybody's work, and now you'll know what salt glazing is. You can go and see, you can pick out those orange peel speckles, and now we're going to also hear more from Sue. Thank you. Over to you. Could you join me in making her welcome, please?
I'm very nervous, so excuse me. I've been wood firing since the mid-90s. I first started at TAFE at Bendigo Pottery out the back, and I actually did the kiln building module and built a wood kiln before I even knew what wood firing was about. And as part of that module, we fired the kiln. We built a big tunnel and we fired it, and when we opened it, there was just something, it just got me. You know, there were surfaces that you just cannot get any other way. It is unique. And the community firing these big kilns, you have a crew, and that crew becomes a community, a family almost. And it's just a very unique thing that not many people get to experience, and something that I just fell in love with. So when I left TAFE, I built Anagama groundhog type kiln, and groundhog is a traditional American kiln that they used to cook all their functional ware in back in the 1800s. This is a bit different. It's got a climb in it, like an Anagama, a Japanese kiln. It's, if anyone knows Janet Mansfield's property, Morningview, well, Bernie's property, there's the Golgong Racer that was built by Fred Olsen, and it's a very similar kiln to that, but bigger. And they're very, very nice kilns for glaze work. Not many people do glaze work in the wood kilns. There's only a few of us, really. And it's fraught with disaster. I've learned to have no expectations. It's otherwise you'd just be a nutcase. And you have to be a bit crazy to wood fire these big kilns, really. To spend, 4 days in a kiln shed. We call it kiln shed living because we set up a kitchen in the kiln shed. And Jane originally asked me to talk about the last 12 months. And as you all know, down in Victoria, this has been a really interesting time. This is my kilns. This is the groundhog here on the left. And then I have a small downdraft bottle kiln, which is very similar to the old Bendigo pottery kilns. When they first built those kilns, they were updraft kilns, which meant the flame just went out the flue. And then 12 months later, they converted them to downdraft, which means the flame's contained and it goes, instead of going through the kiln like that, it goes up and down and out the exits. And it's a really efficient little kiln. It's the whole bottom becomes a firebox in it. It gets interesting pots, but not as nice pots that come out of the groundhog. It's very insulated, this, and so it cools very slowly. I go up slow and I come down slow, and lots of things happen in between, And a lot of it I don't know about because you have two or three shifts to fire these kilns, and you have a crew on each shift. And sometimes it's one person doing a shift, but usually I like to have two. Especially these days, now I'm getting older, I usually get some youth who come and do my shift with me. I do a lot of directing. But I kind of like firing the kiln on my own too. And last year it was a crew of two because of isolation. my husband and I fired. All his dreams came true. He's been wanting to fire my kiln with me for so long, and in all the years I've given him maybe 2 shifts. So this was his dream came true. He did the graveyard and I did the day. And I was quite impressed with how much he had picked up over the years. He usually does the catering, and I really miss that. And this is interesting, a crew of 2. You know, it was good. I didn't have to clean the house. I didn't have to make beds for the crew. I didn't have to feed a mob. It was just, you know, it was good in that sense, but there were no laughs because you're on your own. And that's what we do. We laugh a lot around the wood kiln. In fact, that's a criteria for my crew. They have to be able to tell good stories. And I fire with Kirk Winter. He's been coming to my place for a long time. He's quite a well-known Australian wood firer. And another well-known wood firer, Daniel Lafferty, does the other shift. He's from up around Bega. He was one of the potters who lost everything in the bushfires last year. Well, his studio and that, not his house. And they're good people. We've become a family, so we love firing together. And this is my dog, Saxon. And he's, John had him as company. Okay, next one. Okay, so 14 days. That means a lot to us down here, well, all over the world now. You know, everywhere you went, if you want to go somewhere, you usually have to quarantine for 14 days. And so that's what this represents. It's, this was the first form that was made at the Bendigo Pottery, the ginger beer bottle. And I have a great connection with the pottery. It's where I started wood firing and where I spend quite a bit of time. I do workshops out there now. And so I started making this slip casting, never done before. Don't like it, not going to do it again. But the beer bottles just represented to me isolation. You know, 14 days, a bit wonky. This day was a bit more than the others. And it's quite a few of these have been in twice. So you get those different layers. Next one. Okay, this was called Marking Time. And that's what we did. We marked time. We were shut down for 2 months first off. And I'm in the region, so we had it good compared to Melbourne. And then the second time we were shut down for 3 months. And that's a long time to only be allowed to go out if you had a reason, you know? And there were only 4 reasons, so it was hard. And this was just about marking those days that went by. I think the isolation was quite good because wood firers spend a lot of time isolated. You know, most years I'm home through all that time chopping wood and prepping for the kiln. It's 7 months to fire this big kiln of prep to, I don't know how much wood exactly, but probably 6 or 7 tonnes. It's a mixture of pine and cypress. And I'd been thinking about playing with these iron-rich glazes, traditional Chinese glazes, and it was something I hadn't really done before. I like the blues and the celadons, the greens and things like that. And so I played with these hares fur temakus, which are really old glazes, and they were designed originally to be in wood kilns. And I just love it when you take them too far and you start getting all these black crystals growing in them and the gold crystals down the bottom. And it's something I'm going to play with more. And you get a lot of lustre in the runs around the edges of it, which is quite attractive. Yeah, this is another one. You can see where it's got hotter at one end. They go into they're facing the flame, like one end's facing the flame, because if you faced it sort of like that way, it would warp. So one end gets all the fire and all the ash mingles with it and gets hotter. And so that's what's happened there. But you can sort of see the lustre in those little sparkles along the top. Next one. This is a pot that's no more after last night. Yeah. Every pot I put in the kiln nearly is glazed, and multiple glazes, usually 2 or 3 glazes, and it's a lot of work. It's hours and weeks of glazing. And I take a lot of time to pack. No part of our process is more important than any other part of it, really, but I think the most important part is you pack, because that designates how easy your firing is. If you get the pack wrong, you're going to struggle the whole firing to get what you want out of it. So, next one. It's another hare's fur. They're just full of iron oxide, these glazes, very iron rich. And recently I've been melting a bit of ironstone. There's a lot of ironstone where I live, and I'm interested to play with it more because I almost get like a tea dust type glaze, which is another traditional Chinese glaze. And then another one. It's layered tea dust. Feldspathic glaze, like I guess a Shino type glazes, 2. And then a tea dust, and then the top's dipped in this hare's fur temeko, which I'd never heard of before. I found this recipe. And this was another new thing. Ash glazes are something I'd never played with, well, not since TAFE, because a lot of wood firers have ash glazes, and I've always tried to do something different. I make Australian pots that tell Australian stories. I tell stories about water mainly. And, when there's no water, there's drought. And when there's drought, there's bushfires. And always after the bushfires, there's floods. And they're the stories I tell. And the wood kiln lends itself to these colours, Australian colours. And this, not necessarily this one, but but I wanted to expand my range of blues. And it was interesting talking to Owen Rye, who's a master potter in our world. And he was telling me this ash, this effect, is a 15-minute window at a certain temperature. And if you keep going, it'll go. So I'll probably never get it again.
Do you mean the sort of nuka?
The fake nuka, yeah, which was just ash from my firebox and a bit of silica and clay, probably. Next one.
What's the window?
Well, I'm not sure because my probe wasn't working. And I usually have cone 13 and I only had a cone 12. And because of isolation, we just couldn't get all this stuff done. And I reckon I came down the last morning and my husband had been on the night shift, and I looked in the kiln and I reckon cone 14 would have been totally flat. Which, what's cone 14? 13?
30 or so?
No, isn't 12 1350? Anyway, it was really, really hot. And quite a lot of pots warped in the firebox. But as a consequence, the middle and the back of the kiln, everything cooked beautifully. So, there's give and take with wood firing. You maybe get 40% out. And a lot of the pots that don't work, you can put back in. And I do a lot of refiring, which adds more surfaces. This is my dam clay. That's another thing I played with last year. Didn't rain, dam dried out, so I dug the clay out. And I'm quite excited about it. It's going to do more with it. Dam clay again with a chun glaze, another traditional Chinese glaze. Yeah. Now these black and blue pots. This is something I've been playing with for a few years. It's something different. It's not something that many potters do. I first pulled them out, and not necessarily this one, but maybe the next one. Oh, no, not that one. But sometimes they come out and the cobalt is drawn out of the black and they're really not natural. They're not natural to wood firing. And I cringe when I first pulled them out and my husband's there going, oh, my God, this is amazing. And the Chinese love them.
Rob Barron was talking about the blue yesterday. Is Rob here? It wasn't cobalt though. Yeah, that's just from the...
Blue, anything blue you can sell. And I think that goes over all ceramics, not just wood firing. The blue's an attraction. And I try to get a lot of blue, but quite often it comes out green. But this is probably one of my best pots I've got out of the side stoke in years. There's something about it. It's only little, but that's what I want, you know. Yeah. Yeah, well, this is the one I talk about, that you pull it out of the firebox and it's buried in the coals for 4 days. And so when you pull it out, when you're opening the kiln, it's all covered in ash, and you pull it out and turn it over, and this is what you see. Queensland friend of mine said it reminded her of the blue bottles coming in on the coast, and it does. Okay. And that's the back of it, you know, because it was lying down. And this is this is just melted wood, melted ash. And it's the energy, you can see the flow in it, you know, it's just the things you just cannot get any other way than, you know, sitting in the kiln shed for 4 days, chucking wood on. I think that, oh yeah. And to end, this is our, what we've seen a lot of this last 12 months, the X. We've been standing on them. We've been distancing with them. And this one had been in the kiln twice, and the crystals on it are quite interesting. They're seeded by the wood ash flying through the kiln, and it falls on the glazes, and then in the slow cool they grow. And sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. You know, every time shutdowns are different. It depends what's in the kiln. There's zones all through the kiln that are hotter, cooler. And the more you fire, the more you get to know these zones. And so when you make for these places. And you sort of know what you're going to put on these pots, you know, what glazes are going to go on. And so the whole process is this jigsaw puzzle, like Sandy said. And you've got to solve it. And it's just pure chance, you know. There's no guaranteed outcomes. There's no expectations anymore, because you get very disappointed. And that's what I love about it, the challenge, you know. And there's not many women, there are a lot of women firing wood kilns now, but not many women firing the bigger kilns, the longer firings. It's mainly shorter firings. So it's quite an interesting thing to do. And I do it because I love it. I don't do it to self-promote myself or sell pots or anything. I just love my wood fire family. And I like burning stuff. So that's it.
Thank you, Sue. I would challenge you and say there's actually quite a lot of planning and a lot of experience and a lot of professionalism that goes into both of your capabilities, that's fed your capabilities over the years. But it's fascinating to hear you still talking about the unknown and the challenges and the surprises that come from that, and how that's what drives you on. There seems to be a very common thread that's just worth the effort, you know, for you guys.
Well, it's
fantastic.
like Sandy said, no matter how good or bad the firing is, there will be something in there, some gem that will lead you on a whole nother journey. And you mightn't do it instantly, you might just brew it over for a few years, but there's always something, isn't there? Yeah. Even if it's just a little patch of glaze work on one pot, and the rest of it might be crap, but this little patch, think, oh, you know, and it leads you on a whole nother journey.
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to hand over to the audience now if you've got any questions to ask. Don't feel intimidated. It would be very, very easy to feel intimidated by these two, but any questions at all, feel free to shout them out, and we'll repeat the question to the audience.
Oh, yeah. The wads are there to lift the pots off the shelf or the floor so they don't stick. And when I do it all through the kiln, use the shelves, but mainly they were used in the firebox and your side stoke, because you've got coals and fire, everything on top of it for a long time. And if you don't put the shell there, you have to do a lot of grinding. It sort of calcifies, and you just lift the pot out and the shell disintegrates and the wads don't stick to the pot. But it also, it's got salts in it and it adds flashing and, does different things. And where the shells come from, you get some out of Port Phillip Bay and they're full of copper. And, so you've got to be careful. Nice clean shells are good.
Yeah.
And they're quite traditional too, aren't they? They have a long history.
Well, they do. I think Chester Neely introduced them to Australia. Well, that's what I've heard. It was before my time, but that's what I've heard.
Anyone want to dispute that?
Come on, Janet.
It's just the across-the-ditch rivalry.
Yes. Yeah.
The shell
But
is calcium and it resists. So when it comes out of the kiln, the shell is still stuck on the pot a little bit. And then you put the pot in water and the shell dissolves. A white dissolve, but it leaves the mark. So it's fantastic because it's
The shell will look perfect, but it's white calcium, and it'll just disintegrate when you move the pot in the kiln. But sometimes, like when you get it too hot, like I did last time, it eats its way into the body. So there's good and bad. Don't use shells when you fire too hot.
Steve, do you want to add to that? Steve Williams from New South Wales.
Just take it back to one of the play events, and there was a trivia question, and it was from ABC, which of these materials is the most refractory? Calcium oxide was one of them, and aluminium oxide is. Almost everybody went for aluminium oxide, but calcium oxide is incredibly refractory on its own.
It's with silica that it.
But what happens is that very surface of the shell, calcium oxide, is available as a flux to react with whatever surface it's on. So you're getting this interface, and it's like it's endless fascination in that zone. But it's the most refractory material available. Janet's nodding, she's going. So it's an incredibly useful material for wood-fired potters in that atmospheric high temperature.
It just seems to be a certain type of shell very often that sort of scallopy shape.
Different potters like different shells.
Yeah.
I like scallop shells.
and oyster shell. You can do all kinds of different things. Whatever you've got. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's somebody once bought that to one of the workshops. I bought my shells and all these things. How are we going to do that?
We've got another talk. What is the time, Janet, please? We've got another talk at 11:15, and we've got to recharge some batteries for the cameras. Yes?
Sometimes, yeah. It actually depends with
Refiring question here.
when you're refiring. If it's tableware and the clay is very high in silica, like porcelain, refiring can actually be a problem when you start using it for a cup of tea because it'll spray. So I have to know the clay well enough, and then also, if I am refiring it, I have to test it before use. So teapots and mugs and all those kind of things, they have to be tested. Well, it's not good for thermal shock. It'll probably crack. I mean, it's the same for other kinds of firings too. If you refire a pot, sometimes, you can get more cristobalite in the clay, and then that can cause more likelihood for cracking. But it's also fine to do it, to refire. You just have got to know what the clay is, and you've got to check before you put it out there.
We're going to have to finish up very soon. Let's take one more question, please.
Yep. There are a lot of different techniques. I'm only laughing because I'm just remembering one in America. But I used to put the salt on a channel of angle iron, and I'd sort of just put it along and then shove the angle iron in and tip and pull it out because it goes in the firebox. And now I've changed. I put big pieces of bark because I mostly use stringy bark, and the bark falls off when we're splitting, so that they're like this big slabs. So I put them in, and then I just chuck the salt in with a plastic jug. And I have actually thrown the jug in as well by mistake, but basically I throw the salt in that way just as the easiest. And in America, somebody was filling, you drink a certain amount of beer before salting, and then you fill your aluminium beer can with salt, and then you throw those in. I haven't done it, but I've seen it. So, yeah, a lot of... And people are and also wrapping it up in newspaper and shoving kind of packets of it, like fish and chips. Yeah. And bamboo, yeah, God, probably hundreds.
Anything, really.
Anything, yeah, that burns. No, I don't use a salt solution, but some do. Of course, swimming pool salt's quite I mean, I don't put whole rocks in, so it's not the kind of salt that they use for salt licks for horses. It's crushed salt. And that's already got quite a lot of moisture absorbed into it, so I don't wet it. That was the rule. Oh, you wet the salt and then you throw it in. Technical reason for that, but in fact, I thought, oh, bugger that, I won't do that anymore. And so and it's fine, because there is moisture anyway. Yeah, so that's...
I think if anyone does have any further questions, it's obviously endlessly fascinating, but hang back and feel free to ask them individually. But these two also have to get back to their stalls, and I encourage you to go and visit their stalls, see the work in person, handle it, discuss further with them, and also any of the other fantastic potters and artists around today, because it's a really good chance to keep asking questions and learning. We're going to finish up now to prepare for the next talk, which is at 11:15, and it's called Greening the Studio, and we have some people discussing sustainability, some of the issues, things you can do, and topics of discussion. But I'd just like you to join me in thanking Sandy Lockwood and Sue Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Scott.
I think...